Hey guys, welcome back to the Electric Bike Laboratory. In today's video, we're going to be interviewing Ben from Ben's Custom E-Bikes. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. This guy was super cool to talk to. This guy has a ton of experience building all sorts of custom e-bikes, all shapes and sizes. We're going to dive into a bunch of his builds in this interview, talk to him about working for one of Canada's biggest e-bike parts distributors, Grin Technologies, which is really an awesome place, and just have an awesome conversation with another DIY guy, a builder. So really hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let's get into the interview. Photos from your bikes. Really cool, by the way. Super, for you might think like, oh, it's nothing, no big deal, but I mean, I haven't seen some stuff like that before, right? And
Yeah, I think every single one of these projects came from like some sort of like philosophical goal in terms of the build. And so for me, it was always an exercise of some, well, anyways, we'll get into that soon. But no, thank you. Yeah, it's really cool to be able to do this and to put stuff out in the world that a lot of people haven't seen before. It's really neat. But yeah, no, it's hard because sometimes you can be very critical of your own work, and it's not until much later that you see, how brilliant that build was, for example, or something like that. Yeah.
I mean, it looks like you're doing some top of the line stuff too, right? So it might be shooting for perfection, like when you're kind of using the best components, or you're using, like these totally one-off style. It can probably be pretty easy to have like a perfectionist barrier where, very, very small things you'll see, but nobody else will see.
Totally, exactly. And even in terms of performance, whenever you purchase a product and you expect it to be a certain way, but with electronics or with anything else, like it's got its limitations or certain things that it does better or worse, and that's not always on the marketing material. So you find out the hard way.
Yeah. So what's your background? How did you get to where you are now? Where did it all kind of start with e-bikes? Yeah, let's hear the whole bit.
Well, I am completely self-taught, so I did not go to school to become an e-bike mechanic or even a bicycle mechanic. I started just riding mountain bikes as a kid, like all of us. I was riding my bike, and I used to live in Montreal, and so I lived in the suburbs. And when I was younger, me and some buddies would go to the local garage sale, pick up a $20 one of those Peugeot like old road bikes, take them apart, put them back together, and those are the bikes that we rode all summer. And then I kind of abandoned that hobby for a while, and I came back to it in my early 20s, and I started just fixing up bikes and like putting together some mountain bikes because I started enjoying mountain biking. And eventually I started buying frames and building bikes from the ground up, and just kind of became a hobby of mine. And so I taught myself essentially putting bikes together and everything and anything about bike mechanics that most mechanics know nowadays. And then my job, like my day-to-day job, was in information technology. I was an analyst and a consultant, and I did that for a while. Pandemic hit, and I decided that I no longer wanted to be in that field, and so I took some time kind of aside to not really do much and figure out what I wanted to do. And I came back to basically, bike repair by just having a little bit of free time. I didn't really need to work at the time. And so I just kind of saw the opening in the market. A lot of people needed their bikes fixed up, and, I had a small space. So I just started fixing up bikes for, to pass the time, till I found whatever I wanted to do. And then someone brought me their kit to install. It was just a regular mid-drive, like Bafang, BBS HD type of thing. And I'd already built a few bikes for myself because, e-bikes are fun and whatever. And they asked me, can I put this together? And I said, absolutely, of course I can. And so I figured out that pretty quickly that there was a good there was a need in the market for e-bikes, and a lot of people had already bikes that they loved, and they just wanted to do conversions. And I started with just general conversions, and then eventually specialized and specialized and specialized, and started building, stuff that you can't find out there.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah, that was my whole thing.
When was your first e-bike? Like when did
Um,
you maybe build your own?
my first e-bike was the atrocity, as everybody's first conversion is. Um, but I built it at around 2018, 2019, I would say.
Yep.
And it was just a regular like Brody, probably like a gravel flat handlebar frame. Just wanted to figure out a better way to commute. Because essentially public transport was costing me quite a bit. It was like $8 a day in each direction. And so I figured out pretty quickly that it's the cost of one kit will basically pay for itself in a year. If I
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was fun. And then it all kind of went from there. Then I built another e-bike, and then it got stolen, so I built another one, and
It's
yeah.
a sad story, the getting stolen.
Oh, it's Vancouver. We have a lot of bike theft here, and it's just you live with it. It is what it is. You protect
Yeah.
your stuff. You try not to ride something too shiny because, well, we get stolen. So try to
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
When did you move to Vancouver?
About 5 years ago. I lived in Toronto previous to this, actually. And me and my wife, we sold everything that we owned in Toronto, packed up our lives into a camper van, and this is like pre-pandemic, so we did the giant like U of the United States, starting from the East Coast down south, across, and back up, and that's pretty much how we moved to Vancouver. Some of our friends moved out before we did, and the weather was really nice, and we were a little bit jealous, so we moved out here too. Yeah.
That's its own story in itself.
Oh,
Doing
totally.
that whole huge loop, that must have been pretty epic.
Yeah, it was really a good way to see North America in general. There's no better way to really, spend 3, 4 months out on the road and, go down the East Coast, see everything the East Coast has to offer, New York, Philadelphia, like all the way down to Florida. Um, and yeah, it's a good way to travel the United States, honestly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
did you like you went to Vancouver and you're like, this is it, this is where we're going? Was that
Well,
kind of
it was the plan. It was originally the plan to move there, so we basically just took a really long detour to get there. Yeah.
for the weather? Was that kind of like the main thing?
Um, for us, I think we were very outdoorsy people. And one thing that we struggled with when we were living in Toronto is, first of all, even owning a car, for example, in Toronto was difficult because parking and, it was just expensive. And in order for us to go camping, for example, we had to drive out like 3 hours up north to Algonquin, for example, to get, some
Right.
decent camping. Whereas, some of our friends that moved here, they basically said, look, we've got the mountains 20 minutes away. And I mean, that was kind of a hard thing to pass up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long have you been working at Grin?
Actually, I've only been with Grin for a year. I was totally self-employed before. But I've been working with Grin as a dealer for much longer. I've been dealer with it for like 2, 3 years. Essentially, from the first year that I started Ben's e-bikes, Grin was a huge part of the components that I used. Yeah. But
It's not like you moved to Vancouver to work there. You were there for other reasons.
no, yeah, I was totally there. I didn't move to Vancouver for the cycling industry at all. It just was a really good coincidence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. So
Mhm.
I mean, it must be pretty cool to work there because that they're definitely even like putting Canada on the map in terms of, R&D, some like, the motors you guys are building in-house, the phase runner controllers, I mean, you guys are kind of like setting the bar.
Honestly, it's a really big privilege to be a part of the Grin story. It's absolutely incredible the amount of R&D that you can pull out of 28 people, because that's the size of the company, and that includes everybody in motor manufacturing. That includes all of the engineers, sales, technical staff, support staff. Robert was the wheel builder, who is an absolute brilliant human. Um, Yeah, no, I mean it's an absolute brilliant place to work. Anyone who comes, all of my friends or anyone else who would like to come by, I always give them the tour of the place because it's a really, really cool building as well. Apart from the people. And yeah, no, it's absolutely brilliant. We're really lucky here in Canada to have ASI like in Toronto and to have Grin as well. It's really cool to be a part of it. Absolutely. It's yeah.
A year and you're still very happy with it, so that's a good sign.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of
Um,
innovations coming as well, which is fun.
that's cool. So aren't I guess everybody there is pretty die hard, eh? Like die hard enthusiasts.
I would say so. I think there's a good mix. There's absolutely a lot of people who are diehard e-bike fans. There's people who have been in the cycling industry, like Robert, for example, for forever. And so you need a good mix of people with industry knowledge in the cycling part of the world, and you also need really, really good electronics engineers and really, really good engineers in general that can work out the kinds of problems. So it's a blend, I would say. A good chunk of people, obviously, everybody there loves cycling and is passionate for cycling one way or another. Um, but yeah, you just need a blend of people. You need cyclists, you need people who know their stuff in engineering, and yeah, it makes for a good company.
Yeah. So you're in sales, obviously, so you would have to have like a thorough knowledge of all the product line, which helps because you were using their products for years before.
Totally, absolutely, and having an understanding of people's needs as well is very important. Apart from products, and how those products, complement people's needs, and having a bit of industry knowledge also really, really helps. Being able to having been self-employed before and working with people and understanding what kind of e-bike they actually want as to what they say they want is also really, really important because it makes for happy customers.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I guess building e-bikes for people, that's probably a pretty cool thing to be doing because such a positive emotion when a person rides their e-bike for the first time. And kind of funny that that grin is actually the name came from like
Yeah,
grin on your face, right?
yeah, exactly. I know it's brilliant. It's a really brilliant name for a company. Because honestly, I'm sure you've seen this before, like having someone sit on an e-bike for the first time and even if it's 500 watts or 350 watts, they hit that throttle and you immediately see that smile on their face because
Yeah,
it's like nothing they felt before. It's absolutely brilliant for sure.
yeah. Do you remember your first time riding an electric powered bike? Like,
Oh, absolutely. I remember the first time I put my kit together. I bought like a 1500 watt Chinese direct drive hub motor. It was in a 27.5 inch wheel. I put it all together for the first time, put the torque arm on, did the whole thing, and I just couldn't wait to get it outside. And so it was raining because it's Vancouver, so it's always raining in the winter. But I went outside anyways, and I went in the back alley and just went back and forth a few times. And absolutely, I had a massive grin on my face. I never felt anything like that before, and I thought it was honestly from then I fell in love with e-bikes.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's cool. I remember my first time was a Walmart bike, eBay 1,000 watt kit, and then hoverboard batteries that were just strapped to it.
fair enough.
And put it together and thought it was going to take me like a long time, but then it was like, okay, plug it in, plug it in, plug it in, and then it's
Yeah,
like it works. I'm like, I was shocked that it worked.
yeah, fair
Like, I
enough.
thought this would take me days, but no, it was like, and then yeah, I was just shocked that it worked, and yeah, it was quite the thrill, quite the thrill.
Yeah.
And then I guess in your stage where you've done so many, you just probably like keep searching for higher performance. Or is that your case?
Well, it's funny you say that. So actually, around the same time as I started like doing e-bike conversions here, like for a living, I realized that, and this is going to go a little bit into like the whole, regulations and like speed and all of that. I realized that these e-bikes go quite fast, and humans are quite squishy, and so it doesn't matter if you're on an e-bike or if you're on a motorcycle, you're going the same speeds. On one hand, with a motorcycle, you're wearing a full face helmet, you're wearing leathers, you're wearing a lot of protection that hopefully will keep you a little bit safer. Again, nothing's guaranteed, right? But with e-bikes, a lot of people love to go really, really fast, which, is their choice. At the end of the day, we're all adults and we all kind of make our own decisions. And some people make decisions that may harm others. But that's neither here nor there. And so what I did personally was I actually went and got my motorcycle license, and I went and bought a motorcycle. Nothing crazy. I have like a small little 300cc adventure bike, which is, reasonable. And that's way faster than most of the bikes that I've built, even at that, CC level. And so I decided that if I want to go fast, I'm going to do it legally. And, I've got something that's insured. I wear full leathers. I've got my full face, and I feel good about it because I'm not breaking any laws. I'm not putting anyone else in danger. And of course, I've built myself like a fast e-bike before. Totally. And I've ridden them. They're fun, but it's not worth it for me, especially at this stage in my life to ride something that's not legal. For some people it might be, and that's fine. But I also don't really want to put that on bike paths and etc. That being said, there are regulations out there right now with the 500 watts, for example, where there are cases where I would argue that an e-bike needs more power than 500 watts in the case of like cargo bikes and stuff like that. So it's not really the power thing that I'm worried about. It's more about the speed and the performance, and where you're using it is kind of a bigger deal for me.
Yeah. It's when I get people asking, and they send me a picture of their CCM bike and they say, I want it to go 80 kilometers an hour. I'm just like, you're just asking to be hospitalized. Like,
yeah.
It's
and
not a motorcycle.
Exactly. It's a motorcycle. They might hurt themselves, sure, but they also might hurt other people, which is, the unfortunate thing is that there's a lot of moving mass moving quite quickly. And that's the double-edged sword with DIY e-bikes, is that on one hand it's way more first of all, it's even better for the environment because you're not putting another bike out there that's going to break down because your bike and he's one. You're taking a bike that you like, for example, that you've ridden that's comfortable for you, and you're converting it into something that's going to serve you for a bigger purpose. But on the other hand, there are people who will do that take that too far. And that's fine. That's their choices, as long as they're not hurting other people.
Yeah. That's a good outlook.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do want to dive into some of these builds.
Totally. Let's do that.
Yeah. So let me just see. Oh, I do this. Okay. Yeah. So tell me about this bike.
Yeah, so this was one of the most interesting, actually one of the hardest builds I've ever done. This build, the philosophy behind this build was someone came to me with a really interesting, not problem, but maybe proposition. Don't know what the right word here is, but essentially what he wanted was a bike that he could go out on trails or on the weekends. So basically an e-mountain bike, which has a very specialized job and does it. And, if you buy an e-mountain bike from Trek or any of those, they do their job really, really well. But that's essentially all they're good for is for trails. They don't do anything else well. And that's fine because, they only have one job essentially. What I did with this build was basically I used the same philosophy of, building a trail bike, but I also wanted something that you could, take up to basically dirt bike speeds. And so the idea behind this bike was that it had a very modular system on the inside. So it had multiple batteries, basically 252 volt 10 amp hour batteries. So that's 14S2P times 2. So, and they were single port BMS, meaning that you could, when they're fully charged, you can connect them together and make them into one battery, or disconnect them and make them into single packs. And so why did I do that? It was to be able to either lighten the bike to carry half the battery and turn it into a trail bike in the low power modes. So you could have, like a low power all day type of deal where you can just basically go trail riding, like with your e-mountain biking buddies. And then when you put the second battery in, you turn it into the high power mode and you have essentially what is a mini dirt bike. And there were some limitations that I hit with this build. Unfortunately, bicycle components, as I found out, have a really hard time dealing with 3,000 watts going through the drivetrain. And so I tried a lot of different things. I tried, going from 11 speeds to 10 speeds, from 10 speeds to 9-speed box components, like the e-bike specific drivetrain. And I had a really, really hard time actually getting anything to survive at those kinds of power levels. So I ended up having to back the power
Especially
down.
chain braking, or
Chains are fine. It was more the cassettes, and I broke a couple of derailleur hangers. It also is this bike is very, very sensitive to proper shifting techniques, and so for someone who's a little bit less experienced, they could break it quite easily. It's kind of like putting an inexperienced driver in a Formula One car. They'll break it essentially.
Yeah.
Because the components are so lightweight, and so they're basically designed to do one thing, and if you take it a little bit outside of its parameters, it could very much break quite easily. That being said, that bike rode incredibly. It was an absolute incredible piece of equipment. If it was ridden properly, it absolutely flew when you wanted it, and it worked terrifically as a trail bike as well. Just takes the right rider.
what are the components that we're looking at?
Yeah, so you're
Electric wise.
totally. So the batteries are custom. They were custom made, but the motor in the middle is the CYC X1 Pro. This one specifically was originally the Gen 2, which had the ASI controller, but we then upgraded to the new controller that they now have, which is the X6 controller, and that's a VESC-based system instead of the ASI. The ASIs are good for hub drives. For mid drives, I find them a bit sensitive. They're a bit too sensitive to basically any kind of movement in the stator, in the sense that basically whenever the suspension is active on this thing, the chain grows and shortens, and that moves where the motor expects the stator to be versus where it actually is. And so ASI controllers tend to be a little bit on the sensitive side when it comes to things like that. So they're good for
when you'd hit a bump and it would shut off,
kind of, exactly. Yeah. And that just has to do with the software and sensitivity of the software. It is what it is. It's just a different way to I don't know. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know exactly what's going on in it.
I remember reading those, the error pop-up would be instantaneous phase over current or something like that. Did the VESC totally ameliorate that issue?
Yeah, weirdly, the new controller that they put out absolutely doesn't have that issue. I don't know how they fixed it, but it seems like they've got a more robust way of handling this problem. But so the motors are the motors are pretty decent. Obviously, the Bosch stuff and the all the Shimano stuff is going to be a little bit more smooth and a little bit but it's pretty close. So it's pretty good for what it is. It does the job, I would say.
What that battery box looks super custom. What was involved in that? What, did you find somebody to build it for you, or were you involved in that process?
Oh, I absolutely have fabricators that I work with for this kind of stuff. Reason being is because I have things that I'm good at, but I'm not good at everything. And there's people who are very, very talented in the fabrication field. And luckily here in Vancouver, we've got a lot of fabrication, a lot of experts in that field. So it's easy. It's not easy to find someone to work with, but it's doable. It's possible to find someone to work with long term that kind of understands what I need and can work with that. And so yeah, I mean, I brought it to a fabricator and it was fully custom built. It was fully paid for by the client. So originally I was just going to go for a regular battery bag, but that didn't do. So we went fully metal. It's a steel box.
Sheet metal?
I think it's steel sheet metal. We went with steel because steel is really thin and strong, whereas aluminum would have needed to be thicker. Um, and it's also a lot more expensive to weld because you have to find a TIG welder, which is, it's its own thing. But with steel, what's nice is that you can keep the sheet quite thin and it still be really, really strong. And it doesn't really add that much more weight, especially in this kind of application, like where the weight it starts to not matter as much.
Yeah, and I mean probably lighter ultimately than thick aluminum that's harder to bend, and yeah, it needs an AC TIG welder, a lot more difficult. Was it painted or powder coated or?
It was I think it was powder coated. No, this one was painted. The powder coating would have just put us way over budget. No, I normally powder coat things, but in this case, well, we had a budget to stick to, and to be honest with you, this thing's gonna get scratched up anyways. It's a mountain bike, right? So
Yeah,
might as well. Yeah.
that is cool.
Mhm.
So that's 3,000-ish watts. Yeah, like with mountain bikes, they're the thing with a bike like this, they're built from the factory to be super light, right? Like that's
Yeah.
like one of their everything is like super optimized for being extremely lightweight and to take on human power, which is what are we putting at like 250 to 500 watts or something like that of
Yeah, humans can peak at 1,000. The strong ones can. Like you can put out 1,000 at a given moment, but you're only putting that out for like half a second at most. And then, consistently, we're putting out 150 watts. If you're an athlete, you can consistently put out more than that.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
Ah, there it is. Yes. This bike was built for a photographer, and
Okay.
yep, there's a lot of guys around the age of 50 who love choppers. Um, I guess it was a thing when they were growing up, and so he had a very, very special idea in his head. He wanted black and gold, and everything had to be black and gold. Not a single bolt on this thing could be silver. And so it was weirdly a challenging build because as working with a photographer or someone who has a really good eye, they notice everything. And so um, for example, whenever you're trying to make a bike gold, the hard part about it is now every single part of the bike that's gold has to be the same exact gold color. Otherwise, it ends up being tacky. And so
I didn't even think of that.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so basically, what that meant was that if all the little pieces that you see that are gold on this bike, on the handlebars, the little things that hold the headlight, for example, the rims, obviously, the crank, all of that had to be powder coated gold. And then not just powder coated, but then like done some work after for example, the crank. After it got powder coated, I had to go out with a Dremel and Dremel every single one of these teeth out. Otherwise, the chain wouldn't fit. And so on. Yeah. um, so we did it. It looked really, really good. The frame and everything else that was black was powder coated black to match as well. Um, and so it looked really, really good. That was actually a 72-volt battery. Very, very small, but it's 72 volts with a RH212 motor in the rear. I quite like those motors. They're not expensive, but they're pretty damn robust. And a phase runner. And basically a one-handed throttle operation with like a regenerative brake as well. So double throttles, actually, one on each side. And then I made holes in the frame, or sorry, in the handlebar. I ran all the wiring through the handlebar, out the handlebar, into the frame, to the back of the bike, all the way through the frame.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. I haven't heard anyone do that before. That's pretty epic.
It was a fun build. I really enjoyed it, and it rode really cool. Also, that front fork is fully custom as well. I purchased a upside down fork, and what I did was actually I took it apart, um, cut the springs to make it, like a chopper sized front fork. Again, powder coated the stanchions and the triple trees as well. Yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was fun.
That's cool because yeah, that is a suspension fork on the front thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a fully functioning one as well, so it works.
that's cool. So the RHD12 motor, I'm not too familiar with them. So that's like, is that a Grin product or is that Crystal Light or?
Yeah, so Grin sells the RH212. It's a nine continents motor. It's obviously a Chinese motor, but it's not, I don't know of any other company that actually sells the nine continents motors. Grin has had a relationship with nine continents for a while. Um, and they make really, really good, like, direct drive motors. They're not like lightweight, but they're durable and they work for a long time. They've got nice solid axles. They're good motors and they take stator rate. And so that motor is about 27 millimeter stator, I think, something in that range. And so when you add stator rate to it, because it's a big thick shell on the outside, it actually works really well to absorb the heat. And so you can actually, like, I ran 45 amp controllers with these motors, no problems, all day.
Nice. At 72 volt or
72 volts, yeah, 3,000 watts. I'd say 3,000 watts is probably the higher limit of what this motor can do. Um, Ideally, you're running it with something that has temperature control so that you're never, like, exceeding the temperatures. But generally speaking, they'll take it.
that's cool. I saw the Grin video showcasing the Statorade when they put it in like a folding bike and drove up the hill.
Yes,
And then,
yeah.
and then basically just saw like with Statorade and without Statorade, and it just made such a huge difference. Basically allowed the motor to not overheat. So
Mhm. And it, you know what? It really, in practice, in real life, it really does make that big of a difference. Basically, the difference is that little air gap in between the stator and the outside shell. Bridging that gap makes a huge difference in terms of the performance for these direct drive hub motors. I personally wouldn't run a direct drive hub motor without stator right now. It doesn't make sense. Like, the power to weight ratio difference is huge.
yeah, no
Yeah.
kidding.
Mhm.
Question on Statorade. Does it have to get replaced every number of years? Like, I guess if it leaks out, or does it like have any water in it that evaporates or anything like that?
Yeah, so you know what? Grin tested that actually, and they ran the Statorade like motors on a bench, and they found like 20, 40, 50,000 kilometers. Only then did it need, like, maybe a little bit of a top up. Even still, like, just a top up. Statorade can leak out of your motor if your motor is at like a quite high RPM, so like 1,000 RPM, it will start not working as well. But to go 1,000 RPM, you have to either be going quite fast or have like a scooter motor, essentially. Um, but essentially, like, you don't necessarily need to know. You shouldn't need to, unless, let's say, you open up your motor for maintenance and you wipe it away. Yeah, it stays in there long enough to where, like, I wouldn't really worry about replacing it. But yeah, it might need to top up like every few years or so. That's as often as you would do it.
Pretty minor then. It's pretty maintenance free.
Yeah, totally.
That's cool. Here's another look.
Yeah, there's that front
So
fork.
the front headlight, that's a pretty sweet looking headlight. Um, did you have to run that through like a converter, or did that run right off the phase runner?
That's fully custom. So inside of that shell, you've got an LED, from just like like what you'd put on like a car or motorcycle, those little LED headlights that I actually glued in there. And then there's a DC to DC converter inside that basically converts the power from the battery to the appropriate 12 volts that light runs with. And yeah, I mean, it's the upside of doing it that way is that basically you get the look, and it's all kind of encased in that shell, so like you don't have anything external. The only downside is it's a little custom, so if it does break, it's a little bit harder to replace. But yeah, no, it's got a little tiny DC to DC converter, and it's wired up to like a switch on the handlebar, and that's it. That's all it needs to do. Yeah.
And did you assemble it? You just had like a housing, and then you got a light, and then the converter and everything?
Yeah, so I just bought the assembly online, and essentially, because it obviously needed to be taken apart completely, right? And parts of it needed to be sent to powder coating.
Right.
And so it was obviously powder coated and all this stuff, and then reassembled. And so what I did was a lot of the little bits and pieces that normally come with these, like the clips that hold the glass in place, for example. I glued the glass with like silicone or some adhesive to the actual front, so it never really needs to come off. I basically took some liberties with the design and made something that looked cool. Yeah,
That's-
yeah,
How was he happy?
yeah. He was over the moon. He loves his bike. He's got a house in California somewhere, and he takes this thing out to the boardwalk. He's got a dog that he attaches a little dog carrier to, and takes it out for rides on the boardwalk in Southern California. So I think he's pretty happy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people like had the Stranger Things style bikes as kids, like in the 60s, 70s, I think.
Totally.
And quite the resurgence, right, of people wanting these kind of bikes because they also just look super cool. It looks very, very motorcycle-like, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they love that style. Some people here love their like chopper Harleys, and again, like the Stranger Things bikes. Those I would find a little bit challenging to convert. They have very small wheels, and I don't even know what the standards for those bikes are in terms of the dropouts.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think they're narrow.
Yeah, probably. So they'll need to be stretched for sure. Which, to be fair, I've done with a lot of bikes. Like I built BMXs and stuff. So it's all the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Speaking of that, let's
Oh yeah.
that was one that I really liked.
Yeah, that one definitely got a lot of attention on online for sure when I first brought it out. That one was a challenging one as well, but
Yeah.
so much fun to build. Yeah, that thing is absolutely silly. I'm using the same drivetrain actually in this bike as I was using in the chopper, which is hilarious because it's quite literally how. Yeah, and it's got no brakes. I don't know if you noticed.
I did not notice that.
It's
So
got
is it all regen?
It's all regen, yeah. It's all regen. It's got one of those caliper pack brakes. I built it for. It's funny. A lot of the people that I build bikes for end up being business owners, but it is what it is. But I built it for another guy who owned a drywalling company, and he just really liked fast things. He liked BMXs. He had a fast car. He just enjoyed it, but he was a relatively reasonable human in the sense that like he wasn't the type that was gonna like hurt himself on it. He just wanted something that was fast, that he
Yeah. Fun.
yeah, exactly, fast and fun, and basically he's relatively responsible as a human, so I didn't have a problem giving him something like this. But essentially all it is it's a 72 volt 10 amp hour Samsung 40T battery. So lots of discharge, like high discharge, on RH212 standard wind. So it only tops out at 55 kilometers an hour, which let's be honest, it's plenty for this.
Yeah, probably insane torque.
Insane torque, exactly, and just an absolute blast to rip on the throttle. You won't go far, but you'll have fun doing it. That's for sure. And he lived downtown Vancouver, which is quite a small place, and so he needed just something to rip around the block, to go to his buddy's house or to the store to grab something. And so this build was really challenging because of the aesthetic and keeping the aesthetic of a BMX bike without making it look like, a Franken bike. If you go online and you go onto the forums of like DIY e-bikes or whatever, you'll notice that a lot of people are building these bikes, but they look a bit hokey, or the battery's not where it should be and stuff like that. And it's understandable because it's really hard to build. And so what we did for this build specifically was we actually mounted the battery to a fixed plate, which would then get pressed into the bike, so that the fit was so tight that the battery actually pressed in, and then we have two bolts that bolt into the side of the down tube on one side and hold the entire assembly together.
That is cool. I've never heard that before. That is cool.
Yeah, I actually came up with that with my fabricator. We kind of like worked this problem out together because when I bought the battery, I knew that it would fit. And it like you literally could press fit it in without anything, and it would stay there. Obviously, that's not good enough, but Yeah, no, we worked out this idea where we basically took a piece of metal and like made it like a semicircle, and then had a flat place where you would actually bolt the battery down, and the whole assembly just kind of like goes in sideways like that and presses in. Um, and it worked out brilliantly. And so the obviously I didn't want the battery to be like permanent, but
Yeah.
also I mean it's serviceable, it's non-removable, if that makes any sense. So it's not a
Just
battery.
need the tools to pull it out, basically, right?
Exactly. It's still removable, but it's not removable day to day. And that's fine
Yeah.
because the bike is small. You can just wheel it in and put it in your living room, charge it. It's all good. And yeah, the basically the rear dropouts actually had to be reworked entirely. So we chopped the straight track style dropouts off, and then basically welded like little ears and made them go out further to widen the hole.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
because the rear end of a BMX bike is quite short. So if you spread the dropouts, you're actually pushing the wheel inboard, which is fine on most bikes where you've got the space. But on a BMX bike that's already pretty twitchy, you're going to end up making the bike even twitchier. So we actually lengthened the rear end by about an inch,
Okay.
and that gave the bike like top speed stability,
Yeah.
just a little bit of extra stability, which really helped with this bike. And yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. Getting everything to behave though was every all the little spacings, getting the chain to basically be tight while not using
Right.
tensioners and all this other stuff.
Right.
I basically use torque arms as chain tensioners and torque arms. So I've got one torque arm on each side, and it all came together just so perfectly that the chain is tight. The both the torque arms are tight in either direction, so you can do regen without any kind of issues. Um, yeah, challenging to say the least.
Was it using V4 torque arms on this one, or
I think so. Yeah, I think I was actually using a combination of V3 and V4. I think I was using um, the V4 arm that sits on the bike, and then the V3 where it kind of goes out and up, as
okay?
the ones that are actually on the motor. In this case, it seemed to work best for this bike. Or I may have used, anyways. I think that's what I did, if I remember correctly. It was something along those lines.
And then is standard rear dropout on a BMX like somewhere around like 110 millimeters versus
Yeah.
like 135 that you need for that motor or more?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And so that's the other challenging part about building a BMX is that you either need to spread the dropouts or modify the dropouts in order to get a rear motor to fit. I have this idea in my head, which I'll try one of these days, but it's to um, instead of using a rear motor, I want to use a front motor and attach a fixed cog to it. So one of those cogs that like you can mount to the disc brakes, and then having like a freewheeling bottom bracket of sorts. So
Front on the front.
yeah, that's the only other way that I can think of doing it without spreading the dropouts. But yeah, that's with BMXs, like you will always end up spreading the dropouts. Hopefully you've got the space for it. And yeah, it's normal. Like I do it with cruisers all the time. Cruisers are also like that 110 spacing. So yeah.
And then plenty of braking with the regen.
Yeah, I mean enough. You do. It's not a front brake, so do have to account for your stopping distances. Never take it faster than you're ready and prepared to stop. But again, the person who built this was fully reasonable, and also you can either change the fork out to a front fork with disc brake tabs, or you can get them welded by any specialized bike shop that can do it. They'll weld disc brake tabs on for you. So it's not that you don't you can't have it. It's just we chose not to
Yeah.
do it in this case. But it's totally doable.
Yeah. I mean, you can get pretty good braking power out of a properly set up regen setup,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, totally. It's totally doable. And I mean, if I was to build this bike again, I would love to try to build it with two tiny direct drive hub motors, just to split the power,
And on each side. Yeah.
and then you can get even better regen and braking performance out of that.
That's cool. And then it would also like look pretty stealth, right? With tiny motors up like front and back. Your legs basically
Totally.
cover the battery, so it doesn't
Yeah.
even really look like an e-bike.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually really true. I mean, like, I guess you don't really need direct drive hub motors. You can get lock clutch geared hub motors that are quite small. If you have two of them, that's more than enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe that'll be the next one I build. Who knows?
Yeah. Was the frame like, is it a special frame like titanium or chromoly 4130 or
Yeah, good question. So it is chromoly. It's a chromoly frame. It's a raw frame, so it's got no paint. It's just like that silver chromoly.
yeah.
Chromoly is actually, like, from what I understand, I'm not a fabricator again, but it's quite difficult to work with in terms of the metal itself. It can be quite temperamental. So, like, whenever you weld it and stuff, you've got to weld this very specific way, and you've got to treat it a certain way that it likes to be treated. And so yeah, it's chromoly. But the interesting thing about this bike specifically is actually it has 22-inch wheels. It doesn't have 20-inch wheels.
Wow.
And that is quite a unique type of BMX bike out there. There's not that many. There's like a handful of BMX companies that have even ever built them. And I think like one of them still builds them. But yeah, that actually really helped in making the bike perform better in terms of like not just speed but stability. They made the bike definitely a little bit more stable.
That's cool. I'm a huge fan of chromoly. Like that's what they use in roll cages for race cars, and it's
So
it's aluminum fatigues over time. Chromoly doesn't really, and it's weldable with like a fairly reasonable welding. Like aluminum, obviously, like we talked about before. Did you have to make chromoly like dropouts on the rear because you cut off, or were they just standard like steel?
they were, oh God, I'm not sure. I think they were like, I think what the fabricator that I was working with at the time, I think he said it was like armor plate steel or something like that.
Like a tool
But
steel or something?
yeah, something like that. It was very hard steel. But even still, like, even it was quarter inch, and even still, like, we had to reinforce it with like little pieces of like metal bar on the inside in order just to make the dropout strong enough to withstand the power. Uh, yeah,
And
yeah,
then
that
torque arms.
and then torque arms. Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
wow.
there's a lot of power.
That is cool. And you got to ride it around, obviously, like
Oh
um
yeah.
a bike that small is just so convenient, right? Because you can just I built one for somebody before and they were talking about like they can just grab it, pick it up, go up a flight of stairs. It's not that big of a deal. It's so portable.
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. That bike, I mean, for what it is, it's ridiculous. The amount of power and speed that you get out of a tiny package like that is silly. It's just, there's no other way to describe it other than silly. But yeah, portability is a huge thing. Like, a lot of people don't have, a garage or somewhere to store their bike, and so, the whole push to like electric unicycles and all of that makes total sense in that kind of, thing. But yeah, having a bike this small is awesome.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's so cool that you got the battery to fit in there. Is it like it's press fit? You didn't have to like heat the front of it to cave it in at all or anything like that?
I think I took a file to the front just to give it a bit of a divot to where the tube touches the battery, but otherwise, yeah, it was dumb luck, honestly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just like perfect fit. Just
Yeah.
happened to be
Yeah.
that is crazy.
I'll never do it again. That's for sure.
Quite a bit of work to get it there, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Worth it though, for sure.
So this one is a cool bike too. This one is like a scrambler, kind of like Super 73.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so this one is the bike itself that I purchased was made by a company called Coast Cycles. It's the Buzzraw X, and so they make their own version of this bike as an e-bike essentially. But what I did was I just bought basically the frame and the wheels, and I bought the bicycle version from them, and then laced my own hub motor into it. That's a QS 205 motor. Um,
Nice.
it, inside, and so I put stator rate in it, and I also eventually added hub sinks to it as well. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I mean the hub sinks are cool, but the stator rate I would say probably does 80%. The hub sinks do like an extra 20%, let's say.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
Yeah, and so the basically this box was my idea. Obviously, I didn't build it, but it was my design, so to speak. Um, and inside is a 72 volt. It was a 72 volt 25 amp hour battery. I'm actually upgrading this bike right now, and it's going to be a 72 volt 30 amp hour 21700 celt battery, with a Sabaton 150 amp controller, which
Okay.
is slightly very overkill. but but holy heck, does it have a lot of power. This bike is so much fun to ride, and weirdly, I did not expect this, but the handling on this bike is absolutely stellar. It's so much fun to ride around tight corners. It's very responsive. The front end suspension, which you can kind of see is like a I don't remember what they're called, but they're basically like a Springer fork type of thing.
Springer fork. Yeah. I didn't know that this thing had front suspension until I looked at the other image,
Mhm.
and there's a more bare frame,
Yeah.
but that's cool. So it is dual suspension.
It is dual suspension, and it's actually sprung quite well. I was afraid that when I would add the QS205 into the rear, that it would make I don't know if you've ever done this, put like a big hub motor on a full suspension bike, where the rear end just feels so bad because you've got all this like
Yeah.
moving weight that goes up and down, and it's not sprung
Sprung
properly.
weight. Yeah.
Um, and this bike surprisingly took it so well. This was again, this was an expensive build for someone who had the money to spend, because the frame alone cost me 2,500 to import. It was ridiculous. I thought it was quite expensive, but there wasn't anything else out there that looked like that. And so I really like, pushed for this frame, because I mean, look at it. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I'm serious. What is it? Is it a aluminum or steel or
good question. Offhand, I can't remember.
tubes look really thin. So I would think probably steel, maybe like chromoly like before, maybe
Yeah,
titanium. I don't know.
I think so. I think it is steel. It's definitely not titanium. And I know the fork in the front is definitely all steel. Yeah, I think it's steel. If I'm not mistaken, it's weirdly not that heavy. It's obviously a steel bike. It's not going to be super light, but putting a 72 volt 30 amp hour battery into it, and big hub motor and Sabaton at the end, like it ends up being the power to weight ratio on this thing is ridiculous. To be honest with you, it's
What was the original controller?
um. So they do like 500 to 750. I think they even do 1,000 watt version of this bike. But when I purchased it, I purchased it as a bicycle, so it didn't have any
Any
motor.
force?
Yeah. I considered doing a mid-drive build on this thing, but I think this is better, to be quite honest with you. And 150 amp Sabaton is way overkill for something like this, but it actually makes it so much fun off the line. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's got 3 modes, and so uh, basically you've got like a little switch between 1, 2, and 3. Mode 1 is like let your friend ride this bike mode, and then level 2 and 3 are how fast do you want to go and how quickly do you want to get there. Yeah,
Super cool.
thanks.
And yeah, I think there was a picture of this one. So
hmm
quite a cool like motorcycle display. I saw the 81 volts. So that's definitely a 72 volt battery.
Probably, yeah.
Pretty cool display too, eh? Just like the
Yeah.
blue backlit.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. So this was a ask from the customer. They did not want like a e-bike display. They wanted it to look more like a motorcycle. They actually had like a really fast motorcycle that they just sold, because they didn't want to ride motorcycles anymore. And so that money that they spent on the motorcycle, they wanted to spend on an e-bike, and so they wanted something that looked a bit more motorcycly in that regard. And honestly, this was quite a challenging little display to integrate, because I basically had this display, had the controller separate. Like I didn't have a wiring harness for any of this, which you may be able to get nowadays. But essentially, I had to go in and read the manual for this thing, which is in English or Chinese translated to English type of manual. And it works. It's fine. And there's forums out there that like a few people have done this display before. Um, and so it's okay. But in terms of, putting it together, but yeah, it looks really cool. It looks really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sweet. So what would you say was the biggest challenge with this one?
Um, Actually, the packaging in this bike was quite challenging. Getting everything to basically fit. I actually had to get two boxes made for this. The first box that I made, um, was just
Like, and
didn't quite fit. So basically, I had to take all the measurements once the frame arrived. I special ordered the battery because I had a custom battery made. I obviously knew the dimensions of the Cybertron, and I gave all those dimensions to my fabricator, and he did his best to try to accommodate. And it's quite a tight fit as it is. And so whenever the parts did come in, it ended up not fitting, and so we had to go back to the drawing board and rebuild it, and it took time. Obviously that put delays into the project. Um, and but essentially, yeah, the packaging was probably surprisingly the hardest part of this build.
is this front portion angled, like inward? It looks like there's a seam, or is that just my eyes playing
No,
tricks
no,
on me?
no, no. You're absolutely right. And so the bike, essentially the back of the tube is about this wide, but as it goes on, it actually narrows into a point.
Oh yeah, that
And
adds a lot of complexity.
yeah, for sure. And so how do you make that look good? How do you like every bike, in order to have a look, it has lines. And so if you look at this bike, you see the seat and kind of where the top tube meets the handlebar, where the stem is. You can kind of almost follow that as one line. And then you've got another line essentially that extends down the down tube kind of across, right? And how do you make a bike look good? Well, you have to follow certain design lines, and that was part of the packaging challenge, was to basically get it all to fit. And that's why it was so challenging, was because there was a very certain way to make it look good and a very certain way to not make it look good.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you just do a
Yeah.
big brick battery in there. It's not going to look too good.
No, no, it'll ruin the bike and it'll just make it look silly. But no,
You
I'm
didn't
I'm
have to. Did the battery fit like the original battery, or was it just the case that had to get redone?
well, the battery was basically like a blue pack battery on the outside, is in a soft case, right? The the box that you're looking at is made of, again, steel, and so that was the outer shell of the battery, so to speak. And so I didn't have to remake the battery. I did end up cutting some of like the packaging away from it because I had foam on like the side. Sometimes they're built like that. But otherwise, no. But the new one that I'm building, I'm actually um, the BMS wouldn't allow the whole battery to fit, and so I had to basically lengthen all the wiring on the BMS in order to relocate it just slightly above the battery in order to get it to like just slide in. Yeah,
Like all the balance leads that you have to
yeah,
relay?
yeah, all of
Jeez.
them, all 20.
Yeah,
Yeah,
21 maybe, right?
yeah, 21, 21.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a lot of little soldering. Super
yeah.
cool. Um, do you have a favorite build that you've done, or are they kind of all um different for good thing? This one looks pretty sweet, and
Yeah.
performance, you said, was insane.
Yeah. You know what? They're like dogs to me. They're all good boys. Um, in their own way, you know. But I think the original mountain bike that you pulled up, that was a really, really cool build, just philosophically from a challenge point of view. Um, yeah, I mean, I've definitely, there's some builds that, like, obviously they're not as flashy. Some of them will have, like a human story behind it, for example. Um, there was recently a couple that I built bikes for, and they're in their late 70s, and they've been bicycle touring their entire lives, as a married couple, and they've been doing it forever, and they're getting on a bit, and they're still traveling, they're still bicycle touring, but they need a little bit of help, and so they needed bikes that you could take apart, put into basically luggage, and fly with to Ireland, to Spain, to a little small island near Italy, which is where they just went. But anyways, I managed to buy the last of the Legos from Grin Technologies.
Oh, really?
Ones, yeah,
So they're
uh,
not being made. They're getting redesigned, right? Or
yeah, yeah. exactly. They're coming out. They're coming out soon. I'm very excited for them because the new design is ridiculous. How much better it is. It's gonna be on a whole different level, and not just for the design but the performance. It's worth the wait for sure. But yeah, I mean, they got 5 Legos each, and basically I built them the lightest weight kind of motors possible, and these guys, they only need like 100 watts of assist. They don't need a whole ton because they're out there all day every day, doing 50 to 100 kilometer days. So in order for those 5 Legos to last them all day, they need they just need a little bit of assist. And it's crazy how much like 100 watts of assist will actually give you in terms of like regular performance on like just you on a bike versus someone with an e-bike. It's a bit of a game changer. Anyways, it was very much a game changer for them, and allowed them to continue traveling, and to the year, which was a couple of years ago, the year that I built them the bike, they actually did a tour of like all of Ireland, for example. And they sent me all the pictures of them, them touring and stuff. And last year they did Spain, the coast of Spain. And then this year they're going onto some island like adjacent to Italy, for example. And so that was one of my favorite builds, not because of the build being anything crazy special. I've probably built a similar bike a million times before, but it was the people for me that were, made it special.
Yeah, that's a cool
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, it was really neat to be a part of.
What were they? Were they like Bromptons or something like that, or
Just regular touring, like steel touring bikes, with V brakes and 700 like 700 by 40C tires, just like your generic, like, nothing special looking touring bikes, which in and of itself, they were great bikes, really durable, really nice. But were they good looking? Absolutely not. Didn't matter.
it's easy enough to send that to bring that on a plane?
Yeah, so I built front hub like G311s, G310s. I remember which one's the front, but with a base runner controller in a little bag. And so the really nice thing about the Lego batteries is you can take them out of the bag, and actually fly them like in your carry-on. And so it ended up being that those bikes were just under the limit of weight in terms of flying. And so the fact that you could take the batteries out and put them in your carry-on instead of having them on the bike didn't make them exceed the weight limits essentially. So yeah, relatively straightforward. And all of the stuff is on the front wheel. And so I believe you can, well, I mean, yeah, you can take it apart quite easily. It's very straightforward essentially. Yeah.
That is cool. I wish I guess you said they don't look anything special. That's definitely a cool story.
Yeah, totally. I if I find some pictures, I'll share them for you. Maybe you can include them in the video, some post editing.
Yeah. Sounds good. There's one more that I definitely want to talk about here.
This one. Yes. This was actually one of the first choppers I've ever built. Actually, it was the first chopper I ever built. And I used basically this was a little bit earlier in my e-bike conversion history, and so I obviously have improved the way that I build bikes over time. But what this bike was actually was it was a very low power build. It was a base runner with a 48 volt 13 amp hour battery, like simple, like inexpensive build. I think it even had a CA, which we eventually got rid of. It ended up being just a throttle only bike. But the motor is actually the challenge that I had with this build was, again, that these choppers didn't have the standard dropouts. They had like the 110 mil, and back then I found it quite challenging to stretch dropouts. And so what I did instead was I went on this big search, and I found the one motor made by AKM, I think is the name of the company. They made a motor for a short period of time that was 135 mil dropouts with a couple of bolts that they added to the sides. And so you could unscrew them and get like 120 mil. And so you only had to stretch 5 mil on either side, which is totally doable. And so I hand laced this motor into the rim and built essentially a 250 watt build.
Single speed or 120 millimeter rear dropout. You only had to spread 5 millimeters. Do you know if they make those motors anymore, or?
They don't. So actually, it's the even when I did purchase this motor from them, it was some of their old stock, and so basically that's pretty much it. And the other thing is, it wasn't quite fast. I think it topped out at like 25, 30 kilometers an hour, because of the RPM of the motor. So it wasn't ever designed to be a fast bike. It was kind of like, have a beer, go out around, to the pub. It's safe enough to where you'll never,
Yeah.
but it'll take you up the hills in Vancouver without any kind of issue. Where we live in a very hilly place, so you wouldn't be able to ride this thing around anywhere, without a little bit of assist. The peculiarity of this specific build is that, well, actually, this is kind of most choppers, is that front wheel is so far out ahead of you that if you're ever in a situation where you need to do any sort of emergency braking,
Wow.
it washes out. And so nowadays, what I prefer to build is, if I do build a bike like this, I'll put a big direct drive hub motor on the rear, in order to basically get that you're basically sitting on the rear wheel. So all of your braking power is in the back. And so whenever you do engage the brake, you should be engaging the regen as well. That way it gives you a more balanced braking and more powerful braking experience.
Yeah, I guess bigger like contact patch for the tire too, just so that it actually does have traction on the road. Are there any other rear like small dropout motors available that you're familiar with, or?
And short of Brompton motors, I can't think of anything else. There's really not much out there. You pretty much, if you're going to do a chopper build, you pretty much either have to take it to a bike shop to get the dropouts spread, or buy a frame that has the dropouts. They're not very common. And so that's what makes choppers actually quite challenging, is that there's a lot of custom work that goes into actually making them work, because they're not designed to even have like a derailleur in the rear, right? So like, how do you add a single speed system to a cassette motor, for example? There's some single speed conversion things, and so it takes a little bit of experience. If you've built a few of them, you kind of get the idea, but it's not easy, not the first time around, at least.
Yeah, that idea of the rear cog going onto a disc brake and a front freewheeling system is kind of like possibly one of the only ways to go about it, maintain that 100 millimeter dropout.
Yeah, I think so. And I've actually never tried it. I have the components. I bought the components to try it one day, but yeah, I just get them spread. It just makes more sense. A lot of bike shops have no problems doing it, and they'll even align the frame. Like, they'll spread the dropouts and then also line them up so that they're nice and even. So cool. Yeah, support your local bike shop.
Can you spread like an aluminum frame without it kind of being a safety concern?
Yes and no. You can spread it a little bit, but there's definitely a limitation of how much you can spread an aluminum bike versus a steel bike. That's why steel is a little bit easier to work with. Yeah, aluminum has its limitations. Carbon is, well, you can't spread carbon really.
Yeah. Steel, you can decent amount though, right?
Yeah, steel is a little bit easier, especially if you do it properly. It's not a problem.
Oh, I've never done that, so that's good to know.
Mm-hmm. Quite easy. All you need is just a piece of threaded bar with a couple of nuts on either end. You just, spread them out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's quite easy. But the only other thing to consider is you're gonna want to like make sure that everything is nice and centered, so a bike shop can like jig it up and basically measure each dropout, make sure it's the same distance from the center. But it's nothing that no one else can do.
Yeah, that's sweet. That's sweet.
Yeah.
Well, we're already an hour 10 in, so really appreciate your time. Really cool builds. Like, this is really, really cool to hear somebody like you, your point of view, has been doing these custom builds for so long and working in the industry, working at, one of the bigger players in the industry. Super cool. So I really appreciate your time.
That's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope to be able to do this again one day.
Totally.
I'm sure you're gonna have many more builds coming along the way, right? So
hopefully. Yeah, totally. I've got a few in the works. I'll definitely be sharing them with you whenever they do come out.
Awesome. Yeah. And then your Instagram is Ben's Custom Bikes.
Yeah, Ben's
And
Custom
then, so
E-Bikes. Yep.
yeah, Ben's Custom E-Bikes. Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you again so much. I hope you enjoy the weekend, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank
we'll
you.
talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon. Have a good
All
one.
right, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to drop a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you'd like to see. We want to hear about it. And if you want to watch another video, click on this one right here. Or if you want to see what kind of e-bike stuff that we've got, check out this link right here.